It was supposed to be a flawless exhibition of domestic triumph, a carefully curated video released to millions featuring a softly lit Montecito kitchen, a lemon elderflower cake, and the joyful background noises of two hidden children, Prince Harry stepping into the frame to reveal an 8th wedding anniversary gift, a bronze sculpture of two penguins, a heavy-handed nod to an engagement party memory, and the animal kingdom's symbol for mating for life. But what looked like an intimate romantic milestone was quickly dissected by the public as something far darker. It was a staggering display of performative survival, a visual manipulation designed to drown out a growing chorus of failure. This was not the effortless grace of a secure marriage. This was the frantic, glaringly bright signal of a couple fighting a terrifying slide into irrelevance. This is the story of how a single week in May of 2026 exposed the hollow core of the Sussex empire. We will unpack the subtle visual humiliations woven into an anniversary celebration, the catastrophic PR fallout of a sudden solo trip to Switzerland, and the undeniable reality of a brand paralyzed by its own contradictions. More importantly, we will examine the fierce, unspoken shadow war being waged across the Atlantic, and why a desperate need to control the narrative is pushing a once untouchable couple toward an irreversible breaking point. To understand the tragic irony of their current position, one must look back to the staggering heights from which they descended. 8 years prior, in the sunlit nave of St. George's Chapel, Meghan Markle achieved what seemed impossible. She was not just a bride, she was a cultural phenomenon. She had secured the ultimate global platform backed by the infinite historical and financial weight of the British monarchy. The world watched in awe. She was positioned as the brilliant, modernizing force who held the future of the institution in her hands. That day was the unquestionable peak, the realization of a lifelong ambition, where every camera on earth was fixed on her and every door was thrown wide open. But immense privilege requires immense discipline, and relevance demands more than just a famous name. When the couple aggressively severed ties with the institution that built them, they sold the public a vision of a billion-dollar philanthropic powerhouse. They promised premium content global leadership and an elevated existence free from the archaic constraints of the palace. Yet as the years stretched on, the golden era began to tarnish. The sprawling media deals yielded diminishing returns. The promises of high art production were replaced by the gritty reality of the gig economy, bouncing from one disparate project to the next. The devastating contrast between their royal past and their commercial present began to emerge, setting the stage for a desperate need to prove their worth. By the spring of 2026, the background pressure on the Sussexes had reached a suffocating level. The lucrative corporate partnerships were either dormant or dead. Prince Harry, a man raised in palaces where financial consequence did not exist, was suddenly facing the cold mechanics of American wealth generation. And Meghan, acutely aware of the shifting tides, found herself navigating a marketplace that was growing increasingly exhausted by their narrative of perpetual victimhood. Then came the 8th wedding anniversary. In a move that signaled deep psychological fractures, Meghan released a selection of previously unseen photographs from that glorious day in Windsor. But these were not merely nostalgic reflections. They were surgically edited historical revisions. The images systematically erased the very people who had funded the multi-million-dollar spectacle and provided the guest list of global power brokers. The royal family was entirely vanished from the frame, save for a single obscured shot of the back of King Charles's head. It was a calculated, visual unpersoning, a digital attempt to claim ownership of a royal triumph while entirely severing the royal context. And then the Instagram video dropped. The presentation of the bronze penguin statue was meant to silence the relentless rumors of separate lives and marital tension. Instead, it amplified them. When a couple feels the overwhelming compulsion to broadcast their enduring love to millions, to shove performative affection into the digital feed, the psychological read is never strength. It is insecurity. It is a loud, over-directed theatrical production masking a profound, quiet panic. It felt less like a celebration of love and more like a contractual proof of life for the brand. But while the Sussexes were busy choreographing their kitchen romance, a far more sophisticated display of soft power was happening on the other side of the world, triggering a reaction that would expose Meghan's deepest insecurities. Just days before Meghan's anniversary media blitz, Catherine, the Princess of Wales, had embarked on a highly publicized triumphant return to international royal duties. She touched down in Italy for a solo tour focused on early childhood development. The optics were flawless. There were no massive entourages demanding obedience, no hired crowds, no aggressive security details barking into earpieces. Catherine moved through the Italian streets with an effortless magnetic charm. She stepped out of ordinary cars alone, walking directly into local crowds, engaging naturally with children and educators. It was a masterclass in quiet, generational authority. She possessed the exact kind of undeniable, unforced royal magic that Meghan had spent years trying to manufacture. The public reaction to Catherine's Italian success was overwhelmingly positive, and the contrast was seemingly too much for Montecito to bear. Almost immediately, a counter-offensive was launched. In what appeared to be a hastily arranged reactive maneuver, it was announced that Meghan was traveling alone to Geneva, Switzerland. She was to appear at the World Health Assembly for the inauguration of the Lost Screen Memorial, an art installation honoring children whose lives were destroyed by digital harm and online bullying. She arrived in a sleek all-black suit, standing before 50 illuminated lightboxes. She delivered a somber, impassioned speech, looking out at the grieving parents, declaring that these children were not avatars or statistics. She demanded that tech companies design safety into their platforms, warning of the psychological devastation inflicted by social media. On paper, it was a noble, high-level humanitarian appearance, but in the ruthless court of public opinion, it was immediately decoded as an opportunistic spectacle. The timing alone felt deeply cynical, an unmistakable attempt to hijack the international news cycle from her sister-in-law. But the true moral collapse occurred in the devastating hypocrisy of her actions. Just hours before stepping up to a microphone in Switzerland to condemn the toxic, predatory nature of the internet and beg for the protection of children's privacy, Meghan had deliberately posted a video featuring the voices and presence of her own children to her millions of followers. She used her family as digital currency to sell an image of domestic bliss, only to fly across the world and lecture the public on the lethal dangers of digital exposure. The contradiction was staggering, and the audience saw right through the polished veneer. The Geneva appearance was meant to elevate Meghan back into the sphere of global intellectual leadership, but it instead trapped her in a vortex of intense scrutiny. The internet is unforgiving, and digital detectives quickly began dissecting every word of her impassioned address. Soon, quiet but persistent whispers began to circulate through media circles and social platforms. Observers noted alarming similarities between the thematic structure of her Geneva speech and a previously published essay by a prominent doctor in the Chicago Tribune regarding early childhood development and the digital age. Whether it was a case of sloppy speechwriting or blatant intellectual theft, the mere suggestion of plagiarism threatened to shatter the last remaining fragments of her professional credibility. Simultaneously, the foundational pillars of Prince Harry's own reputation were showing severe stress fractures. Reports began leaking that major donors and longtime executives within the Invictus Games infrastructure were quietly stepping away, citing a profound lack of confidence in his leadership abilities. The whispers compared his entitled, demanding management style to the catastrophic arrogance of his disgraced Uncle Andrew. The Sussex brand was suddenly fighting fires on all fronts, as astrological commentators publicly warned that planetary shifts in Taurus were about to trigger a summer of explosive emotional tension and deeply regrettable public outbursts for the couple. The pressure cooker inside Montecito was reaching a critical temperature. The illusion of absolute control was completely shattering. The only question left was who would break first, and what collateral damage they would take down with them. Inside the sprawling walls of their Montecito estate, the fallout from Geneva and the internal hemorrhaging of the Invictus Games must have felt less like a PR crisis and more like an existential threat. When a brand is entirely built on the illusion of unassailable moral superiority, the sudden injection of public doubt is lethal. But perhaps the most terrifying element of this specific crisis was the profound, suffocating isolation in which it was experienced. The Sussexes have effectively estranged themselves from every natural support system available. There is no familial safety net to catch them. The bridges to the British royal family have been incinerated in a spectacular, years-long display of public score settling. Across the aisle, the Markle family remains a chaotic, severed limb they refuse to acknowledge. They are surrounded not by family, but by an ever-rotating cast of crisis managers, publicists, and paid advisors who only stay as long as the retainers clear the bank. The silence from London during these weeks of relentless scrutiny was deafening. The palace has long since realized that their most devastating weapon is absolute non-engagement. They do not brief against the Sussexes, they simply proceed with the business of the monarchy, leaving Harry and Meghan to shadowbox against an opponent who refuses to enter the ring. When Catherine, the Princess of Wales, triumphantly returned to the world stage, the palace did not need to draw comparisons. The public did it for them. The Windsors understand that true power does not need to justify itself in an Instagram reel, nor does it need to scream its relevance through hastily arranged international photo opportunities. The contrast between the quiet dignity of the institution and the frantic commercial desperation of the exiles has become the defining visual of their rivalry. As the external pressure mounted, observers began to notice subtle but undeniable shifts in the Sussexes' visual and professional narrative. The united, impenetrable front that defined their early departure from the royal family began to quietly untether. The strategy of presenting themselves as a monolithic power couple was replaced by highly calculated individual maneuvers. Meghan's pursuit of solo lifestyle branding and independent speaking engagements felt less like a natural evolution and more like a deliberate distancing. It was the visual equivalent of creating a lifeboat for a woman who meticulously controls every frame of her public existence. Stepping out alone into the spotlight, leaving her royal husband out of the frame, sent a distinct, chilling message. It suggested a realization that their combined brand was sinking, and that survival in the brutal American market might require individual self-preservation. Meanwhile, Harry's public appearances began to carry a heavy, unmistakable melancholy. The reality of his situation is fundamentally tragic. He is a prince trained only to exist within the protective, gilded cage of the institution. He possesses no understanding of the relentless, unforgiving mechanics of generating independent wealth. He grew up in palaces where financial security was as guaranteed as oxygen, now stranded in the epicenter of the American gig economy, where relevance is entirely dependent on the ability to produce a profitable narrative. He appears entirely adrift. His attempts to lecture the public on global issues often come across as hollow and out of touch, lacking the intellectual rigor required to survive without the palace machinery writing his scripts. He is a man who traded a kingdom for a reality show, only to discover that the audience is changing the channel. This is exactly why this story continues to captivate millions around the globe. It is not merely a piece of celebrity gossip. It is a live-action, modern morality play. It is a masterclass in the limits of weaponized victimhood. For years, the public was captivated by the narrative of a progressive, persecuted couple fleeing a toxic institution. But the public's patience is finite, and victimhood is not a sustainable business model. The audience eventually demands substance. They demand the delivery of the high-minded promises that were made when the multi-million-dollar contracts were signed. Watching the Sussexes attempt to maintain the illusion of global consequence while simultaneously launching obscure lifestyle products and participating in desperate social media stunts is like watching the slow, agonizing collapse of a grand illusion. It taps into a primal human fascination with hubris, the ancient story of Icarus flying too close to the sun and watching his artificial wings melt away. Looking forward, the timeline of this narrative carries its own unspoken tension. In the ruthless calculus of Hollywood, survival relationships are often measured not by emotion but by leverage. As the couple approaches the crucial 10-year marital milestone, observers of California divorce law note the significant financial thresholds that activate at that decade mark. While predicting the definitive end of any marriage is an exercise in speculation, the psychological trajectory is undeniably grim. The pattern of Meghan's history suggests that she will not permanently anchor her ship to a sinking vessel. The prevailing theory among those who study the architecture of her ambition is that the union will endure only until her individual brand definitively eclipses his, or until a more powerful stabilizing force presents itself. Until then, the performance must continue. The tragedy of Harry and Meghan is that they fought a bitter, scorched earth war to win their absolute freedom, only to build a prison out of their own public image. They achieved exactly what they wanted, and it has left them entirely paralyzed. They are trapped in a cycle of reactive PR maneuvers, constantly trying to prove their happiness, their relevance, and their moral high ground to an audience that has largely stopped believing the script. The true cost of their exit wasn't financial, it was the loss of the only context that made them matter. If you found this analysis insightful, make sure to subscribe and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me how long you believe this precarious balancing act can last, and what you think the next inevitable breaking point will be. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.